Hello everyone and welcome. I'm Rob and I'm incredibly excited to introduce to you our new podcast, Strictly Cyber. We've created this space specifically for business owners like you who want to understand cybersecurity without getting lost in the technical jargon. I'm joined with James.
Hi everyone.
Today we're going to discuss how people can be your human firewall.
We'll cover how people can be your biggest strength and your biggest weakness, and how you can ensure that they're a strength and not a weakness.
But firstly, a little bit more about ourselves. So I'm Rob, the director of Kit 365, and I've been in the IT industry for about 20 years, specifically in and around cyber for about 10.
I'm James, security analyst at Kit 365. I've been in IT for around 6 years now, specifically in cyber for around 2. How are people in your organisation involved in cybersecurity?
People really are the key to your cybersecurity. We've had this discussion a million times before. And we're always mentioning about people being the human firewall. A lot of the time, organisations are focusing on the technology more so than their people. So they'll go out and they'll buy products, antivirus, they'll do their updates, those kind of things. But ultimately, if the people aren't being trained and advised on how to protect the data, on good password management and things like this, it's easy for an organisation to become a victim to cybercrime or any type of crime. We've got a great story, what we refer to as the post-it note story, right? We went in to do a technical audit, and within 5 minutes, this has turned into something completely different. And what the result of that ultimately is the company's culture, which comes down to the people. So the post-it note story, we went in to do a technical audit and a review, a gap analysis against Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus. And within about 10 minutes, we'd completely compromised somebody's Office 365 tenancy and set up our own administrators within that off the back of a post-it note.
Yeah, and it didn't take long at all, did it?
No.
It was literally 10 minutes.
Yeah.
And that was kind of the tip of it, wasn't it? It didn't stop there.
Yeah, it just kept getting worse and worse and worse the more we kind of dug deeper.
Cyber Essentials went out the door in literally 10 minutes.
Yeah.
It was not from the second you walked in, but from the second we sat down, it was like, okay, this is...
And I think there's, that's also a good point is, we went in there to do the Cyber Essentials gap analysis, ultimately to have a look at how far away they were and what they needed to implement to get themselves to this standard. And from a Cyber Essentials point of view, they weren't actually that far off.
They weren't far at all. But then when you actually kind of step foot in there and have a look around, you realise, like, okay, this isn't great. But when you actually do take a minute and step back and look at their organisation from a Cyber Essentials standpoint, they weren't far off at all, which is worrying.
So to walk you through that, I mean, we go into an organisation to look at their technical controls, which is what Cyber Essentials is. We had the meet and greet. We were taken into an office that had 2 desks, which was, I believe they were like the chairman and the chairman's assistant. We didn't know this at the time, but I ended up at the chairman's computer and desk. You ended up at the assistant's desk. And straight away, we were kind of trying to log in. We're just left in this room, looking around the environment, and straight away we're seeing passwords, PIN numbers, usernames all written down on pieces of paper. Bank details, yeah. And then you found the post-it note, which was the PIN number for...
Well, yeah, you were trying to log onto the device you were sat at, trying to guess the PIN, because all the devices had 6-digit PINs. And you were like, right, I can't figure this one out. You're looking on the board in front of you, trying to match one of them pins up. And I looked down at my desk, and there was a post-it note, and I thought, it said the name of the person's desk that you were sat on. So I thought, yeah, just try that, give that a go. And then pretty much there, I think on that device, the second you unlock that, there was a spreadsheet on the desktop with everything in it.
I can't remember whether it was a Word document or an Excel document, but the fact that it was on the desktop and the document was called passwords.
And then that was it, wasn't it?
And then when we opened that up, it was literally a list of every employee's username and password
and
that was in the organisation.
Device, yeah.
And this is a culture thing, right? So you know, when we go back to people, this is a culture thing. I mean, and it comes from kind of 20 years ago, and the way that people were trying to manage users and passwords within the organisation. A lot of it came from if a user was away and having access to their device and systems, which are all kind of bad practices. You know, in this day and age, there's no reason why you need to know anybody else's username and password, even your own, if you're using kind of password safes. But the fact that they felt that they needed to know these things to allow them to get into this system if that employee was away, just bred bad practices.
Yeah, and there's loads of them flying around. And a lot of it as well, it's because organisations that might have been around for a while, before security culture was really spoken about, they have their way of doing things, and then that's that, and they don't want to change it. I still know an organisation that doesn't let their end users know their passwords. So if the password gets forgotten, or it forces them to sign in from their email on their Outlook, they have to go to the IT guy, who then goes to their computer and signs in.
Yeah.
Because the director doesn't want people to have their passwords.
Yeah, and it was similar there as well, right? That the whole point of it, like you say, was in the event that someone's away, they can still access like whatever they need to access on their device, but that shouldn't even be a thing in this day and age. You know, if you're using like SharePoint to share files, then if someone's away, it shouldn't really matter. You're managing permissions on SharePoint rather than, I don't know, documents that are on the desktop, which, you know, probably shouldn't be there, especially a password doc like that. And then from there as well, when we you know, going back to the computer that I was on, they were also the admin, and they had saved credentials in their, you know,
browser.
in their browser. Yeah, so that then allowed me in as a global admin into their Office 365 tenancy.
Yeah.
No multi-factor authentication. So as I'm trying to log in, I'm not even getting a prompt to say, you know, where's your second factor? Give me the PIN from your phone. So we were just straight in, set ourselves an account up, and then we go and demonstrate that to the user. And like you say, that's within 20 minutes of walking through the door.
And it's funny as well when you mentioned the no MFA, because ultimately what let them down is people, but their technology also kind of let them down. And when we talk about people, process and technology, I almost say it's like the fire triangle, and you almost need two of them to go wrong to actually get that breach. And in this case, obviously, people, that's a write-off, because the whole culture was all wrong, but they actually could have got away with it if the technology had been right and they'd have had MFA, or MFA can probably fit into process as well, but if they'd have had that kind of second layer, they actually would have got away with the awful security culture just by that backup, because no 2 points of the cyber triangle, we'll call it, have actually been broken, just the one.
To add to that as well, with all these bad practices, you know, we did still go in there and do this gap analysis and everything, and you know, yes, they needed to implement MFA, but in terms of the technology, you know, the patch management wasn't that bad. The two main things we usually see when we're doing Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials, especially Plus, is either patch management needs doing or multi-factor authentication on cloud services. And they were, you know, they both needed to be done within that organization. But if we only focused on that, they weren't actually a million miles away from Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus, which potentially gives them a false sense of security. And this is, you know, we do a lot of remote audits as well, so we don't get to kind of see these bad practices where things are pinned up on pin boards, or there's post-it notes elsewhere, or, you know, maybe password sharing's going on. And that's acceptable, but ultimately you're never going to get a feel for people and a culture unless you actually go in and do something. So yeah, that just completely changed the narrative of kind of that audit and that piece of work that we were going in to do.
Yeah, it's funny as well when you talk about that. I think the password storage thing in Cyber Essentials is maybe a bit of an issue, because we've had a discussion on this before. I think it was when I went to do my cyber advisor exam, and one of the questions kind of was, can I write my password down on post-its? I like doing that. And kind of in the exam, I said I heavily advise against it, but within Cyber Essentials, there isn't actually anything that prohibits you from doing that. There's nothing on password storage. You can paint it on the front of the building if you want and still achieve Cyber Essentials. And we had a bit of a talk about that, didn't we? Because there actually isn't anything to stop you from doing that within Cyber Essentials.
Yeah, and even with the difference between like the Cyber Essentials, which is the self-assessment, and the Plus, which is the audit, not everything that you answer in Cyber Essentials is tested within Plus, and that's one of the things that isn't in scope of Plus.
Yeah, well, you never go through policies in Plus and really kind of iron them out. And for one, make sure they've been implemented, and in the first place, make sure the policies are, say, somewhat secure or comply with Cyber Essentials. Pretty much in Cyber Essentials, if you say you've got said policy and the kind of what you're enforcing in the policy fits Cyber Essentials Plus, then assessors have to take your word for it, and there's no point where that's tested in Plus.
So whilst we were there, and again within half an hour, we're kind of demonstrating this, because there's no better way really than actually showing, in my opinion. Like, we could have fed this all back in a report, but they don't quite get the shock factor, do they? Or they don't quite understand what you're trying to say. So when we were demonstrating this, they were actually, especially within kind of 30 minutes as well. I mean, when we're on site and we kind of find anything that's critical or, a real big issue that they've got to sort out, we'll address it straight away. And they were shocked, to say the least, that with just the ease, some of the comments that we got once we told them were that they hadn't even seen these passwords or post-it notes on the devices or on the pin boards because they just became blind to them. It was just a piece of paper that was on a pin board that they see every day without even really noticing what's on there. It's only because we were in there and we were kind of hyper aware and we want to try and get in. And yeah, so I think for them, it was just the ease at what we'd done. And then when we'd explained that, look, we've now created an account and we can get in when we want and we don't even have to be here anymore, these kind of things, it was just a shock to them. And like you say, this was kind of off the back of 2 or 3 weeks before one of their users had been compromised and someone was accessing their email already. So, the fact that they'd kind of been breached, if you like, 2 or 3 weeks before, still hadn't done anything with it. And organisations have to take responsibility for that as well. They can't always blame their IT providers. Ultimately, it's their systems. Yes, they might be outsourced and there's a lot of trust involved, but they still have to take accountability and responsibility for it. Yeah. But yeah, for me, I think the initial thing was definitely shock.
Yeah. I got the impression that they were shocked at the amount of time that it had took us, but ultimately they weren't overly shocked in that we'd managed to get access to everything. I think it was more the ease of it that shocked them, but also they kind of weren't half expecting, but had an idea that we were going to get something out of it. Maybe not that much, and definitely not that quick.
I think it was where we found the information as well. Like you say, like I said, they'd become blind to what was around in their environment. And it was only when you get a fresh pair of eyes that you go, well, what about this? What about that? This is there, that's there. I mean, like we were speaking about physical security, and if you want to talk about information security as well, they were very heavily paper-based. So they would print out kind of bank statements and all these kind of things and put them in folders, and the folders were just sat on the side. And it's, sometimes you just have to be quite open and honest, or all the time you should be open and honest about it and just say, look, if I really wanted this information, all I've got to do is throw a brick through your window, walk in, take your removable devices that have got no passwords on, and I've got all that information, which on those removable devices, we also found passwords as well, right? And user accounts to different services. take the bank statements, whatever else is in there, leave it in a mess,
I think the funny thing to come out of all of it, and one of the best parts of the story that kind of shows how ingrained the way people do things actually gets ingrained like in their head, is that we kind of, when we were done, we went into the office and there was this whole 20-minute talk on how we've done this, and we've done it because you write all your passwords down.
Don't write passwords down.
And it was basically just like a talk of don't write passwords down, and definitely don't write passwords down for about 20 minutes. And then we're like, oh, okay, done. And then one of the people in the office was like, oh, I'm trying to sign into this. What's the password?
Well, straight the way
wrote it down.
Straight the way we get the blame as well, don't we? Because we sat on the
Yeah.
computer, it's like, what have you done to my computer?
Yeah.
Like, we've not done anything. And then go on.
Yeah, it was literally like, it was like, oh, what's the password to this again? It was like, oh, it's this one. Showed them the password, and it was like, oh, okay, wrote it down. Like, straight away. And it was like, and it was the simplest password as well. It wasn't a strong one at all.
No, it was something that you could remember.
Remember, yeah. And it was like, oh, okay, I just wrote it down and didn't even bat an eyelid to the fact that we've just been sat there for 25 minutes going, do not write passwords down, because that's how we've got all of this.
I mean, it's quite funny and we have a chuckle about it, right? But it is actually a very serious topic.
Yeah, but I think it goes to show I think it's a lot of it's habits.
Yeah,
and it is just
cognitive behaviour,
yeah.
right? So what do organisations do to then address that?
People instantly jump to training, which is a big thing, and a lot of organisations don't do enough. But also there's a cost to that. But I think ultimately a lot of security culture trickles down from the top, and I think it's more the business owners that need to get kind of the right ideas themselves, so they can then trickle that on down to their staff. And
so how do we encourage people to change culture? Is it like throw away the book and start again? Is it like a cold turkey thing? Do we drip feed that in? Personally, I don't think there's a right or wrong answer.
No, and I think it differs probably organisation to organisation, but I think it really depends on the organisation, because bigger organisations, that's going to be harder.
Yeah.
But then in some instances might also be easier, because a whole load of training, they might be able to afford to have
in terms
half of their staff off for however
so
long to go and do this training. Yeah. So that plays its part. But also, you I guess you'd say the more people you have, the more people kind of ideas you need to change, which will take longer and cost more money. But I think there's a lot can be done for free. It doesn't have to be expensive training, because as well, when you I think when you send stuff through training, it's like, oh great, I've got to do this cybersecurity training. I think it's more just generally day to day, from the second you have somebody join you, kind of making people aware. And if you are in the office, being around the office and kind of being aware as to what's going on, because I think too many people kind of come into work, and because of their 9 to 5, 5 days a week, nothing crosses their mind, and they don't, like you said, they're blind to everything. They don't see the walls. They kind of come in, they walk in, they sit at the desk and they work, and what's going on around them, kind of they're not too aware of.
I think the change thing, it's that resistance to change as well, isn't it? And like you say, it's the cognitive behaviour. So a lot of people, it's a habit. So a lot of people are just used to that habit. And as soon as, I mean, we see it time and time again when we say, right, you've got to put multi-factor authentication on your cloud services. The fact that people, when they log in, have now got to just quickly go to the phone or go back to the email because they're getting
the end of the world.
Yeah, like it's like, oh my God, these extra 5 seconds that it's going to take me to log in is like, it's the end of the world. But if you can go through that pain of change for a couple of weeks, usually it then just becomes habit again. And those initial 5 seconds 2 weeks ago aren't even an issue anymore. It's just, again, it's just that repeat. This is how we log in now. It's almost forgotten. I mean, in this instance, I do think there was like a few things that they could do. Again, straight away, put multi-factor authentication on absolutely everything. Reset all their user passwords and do not share them with anybody. If they need to get into that account for whatever reason, that's when, you know, the IT provider should be contacted, or whoever's managing the users, to reset the passwords and do it in a secure and safe manner. So for me, in that instance, it definitely would have been like this is what we're doing from now. Like
Day one, this has got to
like a night
change.
and day, rather than kind of drip feed it in, because in that organisation, people would have just 100% just tended to go back to what they know, rather than like this is what we're doing from now. You know, not necessarily a clear desk policy, but I'd definitely be taking pens and paper off people for a while.
Yeah, 100%.
Do not write anything down.
Yeah, and that's another thing, like the whole clear desk policy. Every desk you sat down at, I don't think there was a desk while we were there I sat down at that there wasn't something on a bit of paper written down, whether it was a password or whether it was a phone number or an email address or something that, you know, they'd probably sit down and look down and go, oh, it's just an email address, it's just a phone number. But kind of the more you have lying around, the more likely people are able to get something out of it. And that's other people's information as well. I've got another good story from when I used to work in IT. So we ordered some laptops for a charity, and they came in a box. So I got them out. I was like, okay, let's set these laptops up. Open the box up, and all of the laptops came in a box full of shredded paper instead of bubble wrap. And I was like, okay, I took the laptops out, and there was like the shredder they used must have obviously not been that good. And I kind of pulled a bit of paper out, and I'm like, oh, there's a phone number. And kind of the more bits of paper you pulled out, there was like phone numbers, email addresses, and you realise that this company that was sending them out was just taking everything out of their shredder and packing boxes with it. And it's like you are sat there thinking, this is awful.
So secure destruction then, of information.
Yeah, and I couldn't believe it. I was like, the bits of paper where you could see names, like literally names, phone numbers, email addresses, and then there'd be like a bit of a newspaper, and then there'd be like a bit of a poster that they're shredding. And it's like, you could really put this together and figure a lot out.
Yeah.
It was like, okay.
And that's what we did, right? Like, again, Post-it note story, it was just connecting the dots.
Yeah.
Like I say, we're sat at two different desks. I mean, we were quite fortunate, I suppose, in one respect, that they actually put us in that room and just kind of left us to it. But again, that kind of highlights the fact that people with more than enough time on their hands are going to connect these dots anyway. We were just in there and straight away just...
Well, all it takes is somebody that's trying to connect the dots.
Yeah.
And then they'll figure it out.
Yeah.
You know, for somebody walking in kind of oblivious to it all, it doesn't mean much. But the second you go in there looking for that, it jumps out at you straight away.
What are the common cybersecurity blind spots that businesses have?
It's a good question. I think it usually lies within people. Like, it's always people, because I think ultimately something that maybe people don't like to hear is that people aren't maybe as smart as we think, especially when it comes to technology. I mean, technology blows us out the water, but generally speaking, it's people, because like we said, with kind of the Post-it note story, people become accustomed to their surroundings and almost blind to their weaknesses because it's just normal for them. And then that's kind of what leads to a kind of gaping hole or an open door that they don't even know exists because they're just completely blind to it.
I think this is actually quite a challenging question to answer. It's like anything. I mean, we deal with cybersecurity, so we're aware of the practices or what we should be doing, what we shouldn't be doing. But I think a lot of organisations are guilty of not knowing what they don't know.
Yeah.
So how are they even supposed to ask?
Yeah.
Like, you know, obviously they should be coming to people like ourselves, other organisations that deal with cybersecurity and so on and so on. 100% they need to start with a review, but I don't think there's any one silver bullet for that. Like I say, if they don't know what they should be focusing on or where their weaknesses are, how are they ever going to address them? And again, to come back to the Post-it note story, you go in there to do one thing, which is let's have a look at the technology, let's see how far out that is, and it turns into
something different.
Yeah,
like
people,
completely
culture.
Different. Yeah.
Yeah. So again, we come back to people, process, technology. Until you go in there and you have some form of review, how are you ever going to know where you need to improve? You know,
I think you can take pretty much kind of every large-scale, well-known cyber attack kind of in recent years, and you can fall back on people somewhere along the line. Like if you look at the like big MGM hack, ultimately it was process that let them down, but there was a person on the other end of the phone who allowed it to happen. And for people that don't know, basically the MGM hack happened because somebody managed to get, I believe it was like an employee ID of one of the employees.
where did they get that from? Do you know?
I'm not entirely sure. I think actually where they got it from.
Was it from social media? Was
I
it
think
like
it
off a
was
photo or
social
something?
media. Somebody like an employee posted a picture on social media, and in that photo it had their like employee ID, and then somebody had taken that, pretty much called up MGM's help desk and said, "Hi, I'm this person."
So this is
And they're kind of-
ultimately someone connecting dots and then
Yeah.
doing social engineering.
The exact
right?
same thing, but I know this was much more costly and on a much larger scale, but it's the same thing. And they pretty much just called up MGM's help desk and said, "I'm this person. I forgot my password. Can you change it for me?" And their kind of security control for that, or their process that ultimately was flawed, is that they only ask them for their employee ID, and if they can provide that, they'll change the password and then give it to them on the phone. And again, there was obviously no multi-factor authentication, but ultimately kind of where it started was with a person making that one error that then led to the process and the technology being exploited. But I think a lot of them, it always starts with the person that kind of kicks the process off and lets somebody connect the dots to exploit the process and the technology.
Yeah, and it's really hard as well because that's who isn't on social media posting stuff nowadays, and like it almost becomes a minefield and into what can I post, what's in the background, should I post, shouldn't I post, are people aware of any of this stuff?
Yeah, and I think as well with the internet and social media, people don't actually realise what they're posting and what it includes. Like how many dots you can actually probably connect just from somebody's Facebook. I mean, you can figure out birthdays, you can figure out, and even down to things like security questions. I mean, when you look at kind of the main security questions, it's things like mother's maiden name, first school you attended. Most people just have that on the Facebook. You can go and find it.
So what's one way that we can get around that then? I mean, I know what I do. Like, I never answer those questions. Like, if it asks me what's my mother's maiden name, I'm not putting my mother's maiden name. Like, it could be something that's around me at the time. It's not all, I don't always answer it in the same way either. So if I'm asked by 5 different things, what's your mother's maiden name? That's going to be literally, it could be an object one day, a colour another day, or a combination of those things.
I mean, yeah, the security questions kind of being treated as passwords as well. That's not something people talk about much because security questions are far easier to guess than passwords. Because, like I said, most people just have them and talk about them online. And I think with security questions as well, it is always things like, what's your dog's name? What's your mother's maiden name? What school did you go to? It's kind of information that people now happily share online. That's probably why we've seen us move away from that. Does Cyber Essentials give organisations a false sense of security?
Just doing a remote Cyber Essentials Plus for that organisation, giving them a bit of remediation, then passing, ultimately there's this whole other gap or area that's missed. So does Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus, or can it give a false sense of security? I think the answer to that is yes, because really it's only focusing on technology. It does touch on process and people, but it's really heavily focused on technology. And if that is the case, should people still be going for Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus? Again, in my opinion, the answer is yes to both.
Yeah. I still stand by the fact that Cyber Essentials and especially Cyber Essentials Plus is like the perfect stepping stone into cybersecurity for organisations, especially SMEs in the UK.
I think the fact
it's a really good base to build upon, because we kind of mentioned these holes in Cyber Essentials where, it doesn't quite cover this, it doesn't cover backups, it doesn't cover password storage. It gives you that base where you can go, okay, right, we've got this implemented, now where do we go? And you can move on to backups, you can move on to password storage. And I think more certification bodies should be making those recommendations off the back of Cyber Essentials Plus, like we do. If we see something, we go, you might want to look at doing this, you might want to look at a password manager, you might want to look at backups, just to give organisations that next place to go after achieving Cyber Essentials Plus.
So what questions should businesses be asking themselves to prevent that information from being leaked?
I think falling back onto the fact that people are usually can be the blind spot or the weakness, businesses and in particular business owners should be asking themselves questions about their people. I think, one, do their people know how to prevent a data breach? Two, do their people know how to spot a data breach and detect it when it happens? And three, do they know where to go if they think there's a potential data breach?
I think to kind of frame this before we answer those questions as well is like, do they actually know what a data breach or information leak is?
Yeah.
Like, I think that's kind of, you have to start by letting your people know potentially what that is.
Well, because it's easy to think that it's just more serious data, like, oh, it's the business bank account details that somebody's got a hold of. But it falls down a lot lower than that, and simply sending an email to somebody that you weren't supposed to send it to can be considered a data breach.
Yep.
Depending on what's in the email. But ultimately, if you've sent an email to somebody that wasn't supposed to see it, it's a data breach.
Yeah, absolutely. And the reason being is that ultimately you are sharing other people's email addresses that potentially they didn't want you to share.
Yeah.
So again, that's, like you say, it's a data breach. It's quite a common one, right? Like most of the time, if people are always sending emails to the wrong people, Signalgate, it's way back when now, isn't it? But but yeah, including people into emails that shouldn't have been in there. How do people realise that they've done that?
Usually it's it kind of, in instances like that, it's not actually them that kind of raise it themselves. It can be the person that they've actually sent it to say, was this supposed to be me? Or when they've sent it to that wrong person and the person that they were supposed to send it to hasn't got it, and then they come chasing them for that email, that's when they usually go, I'm sure I've sent that, check, and they've sent it to the wrong person.
Yeah, it's usually, the recipient that wasn't expecting it saying, are you sure you've got the wrong, you've got the right Rob or the right James or whatever.
Well, I had one the other week, didn't I? I had somebody email me. I thought I wasn't expecting that. So kind of instantly it sent an email back and go, was this meant for me?
Yeah. Yeah, and also we've had it in the past as well where, we've sent an email to the wrong person without realising, not heard anything for a couple of weeks, go and check and then realise, oh, I've sent that to the wrong person. These things do happen.
Yeah.
Luckily, in our instances, it's not been too sensitive or it hasn't been sensitive at all, but it kind of shows you the ease behind how it's done.
Yeah.
Especially if, this day and age, people are in a rush. They're not really thinking or checking the work, and it's just like, right, get this email out, send. You can get systems in place to, I think, I'm not too sure whether it's Microsoft or another product that we use called Ziver, which will do these kind of checks like, are you sure you want to send this information to so-and-so
You haven't
and
sent
so?
personal information to this person recently.
It kind of gives you that that notification before it actually sends. So
just
it's one way that you can kind of
say, are you sure?
Yeah, it's one way that you can kind of prevent it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I think we've touched on kind of preventing.
Well, what is a data breach?
Yeah,
it's like information that's getting out, right? Like, how do we recognise it? What can we do to prevent it?
Yeah, I mean, when you look at it, business owners should be asking themselves, how do they prevent it? I think knowing how to detect them is a very important thing, whether that's just from an email sent to the wrong recipient or more serious data breaches where somebody may have access. Knowing how to spot that, I think's seriously important, especially because it's true that the longer a data breach or cyber attack goes undetected, the more damaging it's likely to be, and that is kind of fact. So making sure people know how to spot them, and also that staff are on the lookout for these kind of things, because again, it's easy to kind of come to work every day and be blind to everything, that you don't actually realise that you have been breached, and the kind of quicker that you pick it up, the less damaging it's likely to be. And there's loads of things like, even like down to email accounts being hacked. Like a lot of people, it's knowing what a common cyber attack can look like especially email accounts. When email accounts get breached, what a lot of attackers tend to do if they gain access to an email account is they'll set up inbox rules. So all received mail will get sent to like a folder that's built in with Outlook that you get a standard called RSS feeds. So they'll send out all these spam emails from the account because they've breached it, but then the user won't actually see the emails coming back saying, is this you? This is a bit odd, because they'll set them all to go straight to RSS feeds. So it's knowing common things like that, that what does a common cyber attack look like? If my email account's been hacked, how do I know? That business owners should really be showing their stuff.
I think it's process as well.
Yeah.
When we think about what we do, even in the instance where we've sent an email to the wrong recipient, as soon as it's identified, it's internally straight away we're raising an incident and we're reviewing that incident. What information was actually in there? How serious is it? Do we need to report it to law enforcement or the Information Commissioner's office or whoever? We're notifying the recipient. One, the recipient that's received it in error, and two, the recipient that should have received it or who it's going to affect. And then we have this kind of whole internal review process where we go, right, what can we do to reduce that risk again? And a lot of the time, especially in those kind of incidents where we're talking about emails going to the wrong recipient, it is kind of down to user training and awareness again, and just slowing things down. But you can also put things in place as well, like a technical control that is going to look at, are you sure you want to send this email to this person? Are you sure you want to send this information to this person? So there's things like that can go in. Other types of like breaches or leaks, again, is like people writing stuff down, right? And trying to connect the dots as well. So if you're in an organization where that needs to happen, like what are you doing to make sure that at the end of the day, that information goes no further? It might be a case of, it's perfectly acceptable to write down some kind of information for whatever reason, because that is part of your process. But at the end of the day, everything's being shredded, and then it's secure destruction. That shredded information, for example, isn't being used
to send
as bubble wrap
out
for laptops that are being sent out. Yes, the shredding is secure destruction, but we've also spoke today about how that information can still potentially be leaked if after secure destruction it's not actually disposed of securely as well.
Yeah, if you are literally sending it out to people in a box saying, here you go.
Yeah. So to kind of frame all this as well, what business owners really need to be identifying is, what information have we got and how is that used, and how are our users working on a day-to-day basis? There's one thing, like we've said, is sending an email out to the wrong recipient in error, and that is serious. But there's another thing about, right, well, actually, are our users taking photos of orders on personal mobile phones. Like, should they be even doing that? Is that personal phone then being taken home and accessed by children, or
could be jailbroken?
So
like
there's a whole bigger question, and it is very specific to the organisation or what the business is doing. But ultimately, they've got to understand where their information is, how it's being used, and how it's being processed by the user. Again, writing down, taking photos, emails being sent wrong. Most people, when they kind of leave from one job to another, they're like, it's when a company's most vulnerable, really, because they're going to try and take as much information as they can with them.
Again, that falls into process again, and joiners, leavers, movers. It's having everything in place. I mean, you're never going to have, like you say, that silver bullet that it's like, okay, we are safe, but it's having enough technology and process in place to help the people out. Ultimately, I think that's the best way of wording it.
It's definitely the flow of information.
Yeah.
Like, because again, like, people can extract information in many different ways. Write it down, take photos, print it. Have they got access to this information from, bring your own devices? A lot of organisations work like that nowadays, so they can access business systems and information from their own device. But an organisation might not have any way of knowing how that device, that personal device, is actually being used. Is it being used by the children to do their homework as well? Is there more than one user account on it? I mean, all these things are kind of touched upon to a certain degree within Cyber Essentials and Cyber Essentials Plus, but it definitely doesn't cover all of these things.
No. If people don't know how to spot a breach, how to prevent a breach, or where to go when they think there might be a breach, then from the start, they've got no chance.
Another way to spot a breach is unusual activity.
Yeah.
Like, oh, this is a bit strange. Like, this doesn't normally happen. Like, a lot of people will kind of ignore that. Okay, yeah, that's fair enough. Click away. But if those kind of things are happening on a more regular basis, you'd like to think that after the second or third time, people are actually going, this is unusual now.
Do you think as well, maybe there's an element of people, when they do see something a bit unusual, not reporting it because of some kind of fear that it could be their fault and there could be some form of disciplinary action, maybe?
Yeah, I think there's definitely that.
A large part of it.
And I think a lot of the training and awareness that was done previously, and it's something that is starting to shift, was this kind of blame culture, or almost like, you've done.
It's got to be someone's fault.
Yeah, exactly that. But that's it all over, right?
Yeah.
I mean, like, even if we were to become a victim of any of this or do something like that, your initial thing is like,
it's my fault.
Yeah, like, what an idiot, whatever it might be. But ultimately, you've got to kind of get over that ego and be able to report it if you know how. But yeah, you're absolutely right. I do think that a lot of organisations are quick to blame the user. Without giving them the right tools to even identify or report.
Yeah.
And you've got to be able to report with no consequence if it's innocent, but you don't want to. The more you make that person feel like it's their fault, or you idiot, whatever it might be, the less likely they are to report it.
Again, you want that culture where people feel like they can actually say, hold on, this is a bit weird, and confidently go to IT or their line manager and say, not sure on this, can we look into it, without feeling like something's going to fall back on them.
Yeah. Unless it's something that they've literally gone
deliberately
out the way.
done.
But in them instances, they're probably not going to report it anyway because they don't want to get caught.
Exactly.
So but absolutely, if it's like a genuine mistake and they've identified that, yes, they should know how to report it, and two, it should be handled in a manner where they're not going to be felt like it is all their fault or made. A lot of it, in my opinion, comes down to like feeling stupid, or oh god, I'm going to get told off, or whatever it might be, and that definitely needs to be removed for the most part. I hope this episode has given you the tools you need to secure your business.
Feel free to follow us both on LinkedIn, where we're happy to take the conversation online.
As always, all of our information is in the video description, and we look forward to seeing you next time.
Bye everyone.
See you later, guys.